Scout, her father, and the memory that might change everything. Let us start with Scout, because this is the storyline that is going to make you feel something deep and real in a way that the louder, more dramatic stories around it simply cannot replicate. Because nothing in a soap opera cuts through quite like a child speaking a truth that all the adults around them have been too complicated to say. Drew has come back to himself with a fury that has been building for months and shows no sign of diminishing. He has made promises, dark, specific, directed promises, about what he's going to do to the people who wronged him and the families connected to them. He has stood in a room with someone he used to trust and told her plainly that by the time he is finished, everything around her is going to be gone. He has pulled out the restraining order threats. He has positioned himself as the gatekeeper of Scout's world in ways that are less about Scout's well-being and more about Drew's need to reassert control over something after months of having no control over anything. The people around Drew have tried reason. They have tried legal argument. They have tried appealing to what he went through and suggesting that perhaps the experience of being locked in has given him a different perspective on what matters. None of it has worked. Drew is, as those who know him well will readily acknowledge, extraordinarily stubborn. You do not change Drew's mind through argument. If anything, argument makes him more entrenched. He doubles down. He finds new angles to reinforce the position he already holds. He treats every external pressure as confirmation that he was right to draw the line where he drew it. But Scout is not making an argument. Scout is going to do something different. Something that the adults in Drew's life simply cannot do because they do not have access to the thing she has access to, the unfiltered memory of a child who loves her father and has always known, even through the worst chapters, that the man she loves is in there somewhere underneath whatever the world has done to him. Before Drew went into that lake, before Nina made that terrible impulse decision, and everything changed in the span of one moment, Scout had asked him something. Sitting there by the water, watching the family around her, and feeling the weight of all the division and anger and separation that has defined so much of her young life, she asked him if they could all just get along. Not abstractly. Specifically.
Danny.
The Quartermaines. Jason. The family on her mother's side. All of them. She asked her father if they could please just be a family. And Drew, who could not speak, who could only communicate through the blink system that had become his only connection to the world, blinked yes. He made that promise to his daughter when he could not speak. And now he can speak. And Scout is going to remind him of it. But that is not the most powerful thing Scout is going to say. The most powerful thing, the thing that has the potential to actually reach somewhere in Drew that the anger has not yet gotten to, is Oscar. Scout was 3, maybe 4 years old, when her brother Oscar died. She was so young that the adults around her probably assumed she did not really understand what was happening, that the loss did not land the way it landed for the older members of the family, that childhood would soften the edges of it. Adults often make that assumption about children, and they are almost always wrong. Scout remembers Oscar. She remembers how he was sick. She remembers what it felt like to know something was very wrong and not fully understand what wrong meant at that age. And she remembers what the Quartermaines did. She remembers that they made a space for Oscar, a special room, a place where he could spend his last days surrounded by people who loved him, and that the family that Drew is currently threatening to destroy was the family that held Oscar, and by extension held her, at the hardest possible time. When Scout brings up Oscar, Drew is going to be stopped cold. Not because the argument is unanswerable. Drew can find ways to argue around almost anything. But because he is going to be shocked that she remembers. That she was that young, and she held on to those details. That his little girl has been carrying the memory of her brother and the memory of who her father was in those moments with a fidelity that Drew did not know was possible. That shock is the opening. Not an argument. Not a logical case. A moment where Drew is confronted with his own past self, the man who stood in that room with the Quartermaines while Oscar was dying and who understood, in whatever complicated way Drew understands things, that family is not the clean-edged thing you can simply excise from your life when it becomes inconvenient. Jason even told him directly that it was time to start a new chapter. Danny worked with Tracy to make sure Drew could attend Scout's swim practice. These are not people acting like his enemies. These are people extending, repeatedly, the olive branch that Drew keeps refusing to take. Scout may be the one who finally makes him hold it. Will it last? Will Drew's heart stay open once the moment passes and the old anger reasserts itself? That is the question. Drew's stubbornness is not going to disappear because his daughter said something profound. But a seed planted in that moment, the memory of Oscar, the promised blink, the vision of Scout crying out, "Dad, you're back," and rushing into his arms, that seed has the potential to grow into something that eventually changes what Drew chooses to do with all that stored-up fury. Port Charles is watching. And honestly, so are we. Because Scout reaching her father is the story we want to be true even as we brace for the possibility that Drew will find a way to talk himself out of the feeling it creates. Jacinda plants pills, Michael finds out, and the fallout is immediate. Now let's talk about Jacinda, because this storyline is a masterclass in what happens when someone who cares about the right person decides to act on that caring without checking with the right person first, and discovers that good intentions without coordination can be indistinguishable from bad judgment. Here is the setup. Michael has been building a custody case against Willow. Carefully, methodically, collecting the information that Trina and Kai hold, working with what Alexis has confirmed through phone records, understanding that the case needs to be constructed properly if it is going to hold up when it matters. Michael knows Willow.
He knows how she operates.
He knows that a sloppily assembled case gives Willow and her team exactly the ammunition they need to flip the narrative and make Michael look like the aggressor rather than the concerned parent. Jacinda, who cares about Michael and who has her own reasons to want Willow to face consequences, sees an opportunity. A bag of pills. A moment when Willow is vulnerable to being framed. A chance to hand Michael something concrete and damaging that could tip the custody situation decisively in his favor. She takes it. Without asking Michael. Without running it past anyone who might have told her that this particular path has consequences she is not fully mapped out. And it blows up almost immediately. Because here's the thing about framing someone on a soap opera, it almost never works cleanly, and when it fails in ways that damage the person doing the framing far more than the intended target. Willow is already on heightened alert. Nina is in her orbit, and Nina, whatever her other qualities, has radar for schemes. Michael is not naive. When the pills surface and the situation starts to clarify, Michael is not going to be grateful that Jacinda tried to help. He is going to be horrified that she acted without telling him, that she introduced a false element into a case he has been trying to build on truth, and that she has now potentially handed Willow exactly the victimhood narrative Willow loves to deploy. If Willow can prove she was framed, and if the pills were planted sloppily enough, she may be able to do exactly that. She gets to walk into a custody proceeding not as the woman who shot her husband and kept him paralyzed, but as the woman who was targeted by her ex-husband's girlfriend in a desperate and illegal scheme. That is a completely different story. That is a story that makes Michael look bad and makes Willow look sympathetic. And sympathy in a family court proceeding is not nothing. Michael is going to have to make a decision about Jacinda. Not just about whether to continue the relationship, though that question is now firmly on the table, but about how to manage the damage she has created and whether there is any way to contain it before it undoes the careful groundwork he has been laying. The question of Jacinda's future in Port Charles is now genuinely open. She came in with a specific set of story connections, and several of those connections have shifted or disappeared as the summer has progressed. Without the triangle that seemed to be forming around Christina, the canvas around Jacinda is thinner than it was. Her connection to Ezra gives her one thread. Her relationship with Michael gives her another. But if Michael distances himself after this, which he may have no choice but to do, the second thread weakens significantly. And there is something else happening that makes Jacinda's position even more precarious. Serena is in Port Charles now. Serena, who is smart and observant and already questioning why Lucy really called her back. Serena, who is going to be spending time in Michael's orbit through the deception connection. Serena, who had a chemistry read with Michael's portrayer that apparently generated something genuinely compelling. The possibility of Michael and Serena is already being quietly constructed in the background of everything else. Not loudly, not announced, but present in the way that the next romantic development always is on a soap opera. You can feel it assembling itself before it has officially started. And if Jacinda's scheme hands Michael a reason to step back from the relationship, while simultaneously Serena is stepping forward into his world, the timing could not be more perfectly terrible for Jacinda or more perfectly opportune for the story. Jacinda acted from the right place. She wanted to help the person she cares about. She saw an opening and she took it, and she did not stop to think about whether taking it was hers to do. That impulse, protective, impulsive, not quite thinking it all the way through, is a very human impulse. But in Port Charles, very human impulses tend to have very dramatic consequences. Whether this is an exit arc or simply a significant stumble in an ongoing story remains to be seen. But the pill scheme has changed the dynamic around Jacinda in ways that are going to be very difficult to walk back, regardless of how things ultimately resolve.